Welcome to Fun FTC. This year's game POWERPLAY has been out for almost 2 weeks now, giving teams an opportunity to make tons of robots in short time spans. Today, we're going to talk about 17 of the top robot in 30 hours to 3 days that we saw. Tyler, do you want to talk about the ranking system we used?
Yeah, sure. So for those who watched it last year, we had 5 different areas that we ranked on. And with so many more teams for FTC this year, we wanted to kind of make it a little bit easier to go through. We didn't want to spend forever on this video. So we broke things down into 3 different categories and a couple different points being assigned for each one. So the first one is practicality. This is up to 5 points. And this is, can teams take and build something better or learn from this robot on here? And then also, how was the documentation process for a robot in 30 hours or a robot in 3 days, that sort of thing. Performance 1 through 10. How did it perform on the field? Is it going to be a robot that you would actually want to play with or have as a partner on the field? We felt was very important. And then wow factor. Is this something that is really cool? Is it inspirational? Does it get you excited about the POWERPLAY game? And one thing to mention with this as well too is we're only considering robot in 3 days or less teams. So that's, there's some that are 16, some that are 30, some that are 3 days. There's a couple like the one on screen that this is 1 week. We didn't consider this team. We had to make a break somewhere, and we did 3 days or less of us. This video on First Updates Now is made possible by viewers like you and also the following sponsors. SOLIDWORKS is free for first teams. Over 80% of U.S. engineering schools and 370,000 plus companies use SOLIDWORKS to design great products. SOLIDWORKS can help you design a great robot on desktop or on the cloud. Go to solidworks.com/first to register your team. If you're a college student or recent graduate looking for an incredible internship, take a look at Stryker. Stryker provides a housing stipend, great pay, and an opportunity to work with state-of-the-art medical technology equipment. Discover why so many First alumni are coming to Stryker for their internship or career at careers.stryker.com.
All right, let's get started with our first team, Team 21180, Error 418. And I think on average, this team ranked about 2.6 for practicality, 4.6 for performance, and 2 in the wow factor. I gave them a little bit more points in the practicality scale. I think they have a lot of those core mechanisms that team are really looking at this year, especially with the claw, the mecanum drive, and a 4-bar design. But I think there is definitely room to expand, especially in the performance skill, as they can't score on the high junction. Sahil, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, for practicality, I gave it just a slightly bit lower, just because I feel that when you have to line it up against the poles, it really takes some time and really puts more onto the programmers.
Yeah, Buzz, you and I were kind of aligned, I think, in our scores overall. For wow factor, to me, it's not, it's a 4-bar that scores on mid and low, which I think is fine. There's definitely going to be robots that can do well for that. But, overall, this is a rookie team coming in. And I think somebody mentioned that all of our teams here, nobody really did like bad in the rankings or anything like that. But we got to rank teams somewhere. And this is going to be our number 17 team, who still did a great job, especially for a rookie.
Yeah, all right, let's go on to the next one. So now we have Team 12973, and one thing that really spoke to me about this design was their VEX in the zone type intake. I think this is another popular mechanism that a lot of teams are looking at this year, and being able to see how it performs in an FTC robot is definitely super useful for teams. And because of that, I think I had to give them a lot of points for the practicality and performance. I think they really showed how well it can do in an FTC setting, especially with these cones. And it's just something that I was a big fan of, and I think teams will be able to take a lot of information from that for their robots this year.
Yeah, I ranked it about the same. I found it really interesting that they did indeed take the VEX concept into consideration, because I heard a lot of teams talk about this. And once they get that thing more sturdy, it would definitely be a really strong mechanism in the game.
Yeah, I don't know about ranking high points for anything, but this robot to me, it was cool. The intake's pretty cool and different innovative from what we've seen from other teams out there. But, overall, as a robot, are there things that can improve on just a little bit to give them better performance, like Sahil said, like their CG? But overall, still a cool showing by this team.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next one. Team 7974. I think this is one of our first ones that's a little higher on the wow factor. The biggest thing that stood out to me about this robot was the complexity and degrees of freedom that they had in their arm, or in their claw mechanism specifically. We can see when they're picking up claws, they're able to rotate their arms, spin it. So like if they flip over, instead of teams that have something like a virtual full bar, they instead just rotate the claw another 180 degrees. And I think that's something that would definitely impress first time like FTC viewers and things like that. Definitely something they can talk about in judging and so on. And overall, I think it's a pretty cool design, maybe slightly less efficient as other designs like the virtual floor bar that I mentioned, but we'll definitely get the team points as we see in this video.
Yeah, I ranked it about the same for this one as well. I do love the different rotations that I have because that will definitely impress the judges, and if they can get it working pretty efficiently, then it can be very attractive to the audience.
Yeah, I think the thing for me, I was really impressed by how ambitious this team was. It almost seems a little too complex, I think, for what it is. Like to have those two extra actuations things, I think it makes the scoring process a little bit slower than what it needs to be for a team. So overall, great Scott, very enthusiastic team, had a lot of cool stuff in it, and looking forward to see how their robot performs this season.
All right, on to our next team, the Mandela United Squadron. So this was definitely an interesting one of the first holonomic drives we saw out of teams. I think that definitely was something that upped like the wow factor and maybe not the performance, but still just like it was really interesting to see like how this drive performed throughout the season. And then another thing that I was interested in was also in their intake. I'm a little intrigued to see like which robot they'll decide to run by the end of for their first competition, or what design they'll go with, because I think they showed off a couple of different robot types in their video, but their holonomic drive was something that was definitely very interesting to me. Faho, what do you think?
Yeah, I love their like the cloud mechanism is pretty simple, it's straightforward, and it really works well for that one or the lowest stacking method. But for their other robot that they presented earlier with the lights up, and it definitely has that wow factor, standing out and being attractive.
hmm Yeah, I feel like this is just one of those robots where you just spend a ton of time driving and practicing, and hopefully nothing goes wrong in competition, and you can just do like decently well because of how consistent you are.
Yeah, I mean, overall for this robot, they, performance wise, I thought, their cycle times looked pretty cool for what it was. So even though like this one that we're seeing on screen, only able to score, on the lower sets of them, able to score quite quickly for what it is. So I was impressed by that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, on to the Kettering robot in 30 hours. So this is not an FTC team, but now a university who is doing a robot in 30 hours. And I think this robot was definitely a little more of like the standard design, but they definitely pulled it off very, very well. I think the lift was super, super solid, and that's going to be a big factor this year with teams robots. Like everybody's trying to make their lift like as light as possible and as fast as possible. But with Kettering being so stable, there's just no chance of that cone falling out or the lift breaking or anything like that during matches, meaning they're going to be super, super consistent. And I think that's one of the reasons I rank them pretty high in the practicality as well as performance factors.
Yeah, it's definitely a well-performing robot. Well, my only main concern for it is the claw itself. It looks like if another robot ran into it, then it would have a problem. And it's like very shaky, and sometimes it feels like it could be unstable, but besides that, they're definitely a well-performing robot.
Yeah, definitely their dry base is very stable. Right? Their CG is well placed, but you're right with those linear slides going up. Definitely, the robot almost has to settle before it scores, right? And you want to be able to have a little bit faster cycle times out of that, and not it's like you said, Abbas, nothing too much on the wow factor for it, but just a well performing overall robot.
Mhm. Yeah, and one more thing I want to add with this, we saw like in their video that they're able to right the cones that are tipped over
Oh,
and
great
then
point.
keep them up with their claw. And that's going to be huge for teams this year. I think especially in the early season when everyone's like still figuring out how to drive and things like that, like, it's very easy to just be a little careless and knock over the cones. And so having a mechanism that can right them is super important. Yeah. This next robot's one that I'm really interested in talking about, and that's going to be the Creighton Prep Robotics robot in 3 days. I think there's a couple of things that really help the wow factor and the performance of this robot. First of all, I want to talk about that drivetrain a little bit. We can see it's not like the traditional like H layout Mecanum drivetrain, like with like 3 or 4 channels. They actually use like the Hammerhead kit from goBILDA. So I'm interested to see like why they decided to do that. Maybe it's just like what they had laying around, and you can't really order parts and wait for them to come when you're doing a robot in 3 days. But I mean, it seemed to work out for them. Another thing that I really liked about this robot was their virtual 4-bar mechanism combined with the claw. I think it showed teams like why a virtual 4-bar is useful in this year's game. You can see how they just stay in one position and then they pick up the cone and then drop it onto that medium junction without moving. And I know this is like a static shot, but I think the principle still applies with like a longer 4-bar or a similar mechanism that you could do that with the high goal or with the high junction or the low junction.
Yeah, definitely. They really showed how the virtual 4-bar could be used, and I feel like the main reason for that hammerhead design was so that they can go over the small black pieces on the field so that
Oh
they
yeah, the
can,
ground junction.
yes, and they can basically avoid, like, go over that and still be able to score effectively.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I wonder if we'll see like some sort of return to like suspension designs or just like a little bit of something unique in drivetrain so teams have really no problem at all going over that ground junction.
Yeah, the only thing I want to say on this team is I think I had them ranked up a little bit higher than what they ended up in this. I was pretty impressed with the Kraken Robotics team. I like the arm for it. I think there's a lot of cool things that teams can learn from it. So well done for this team. Before we head back in the countdown, let's stop and thank our friends at SolidWorks for supporting First Updates Now. Hey, did you know that SolidWorks is free for all First teams, both their desktop and CloudCat apps? You can use SolidWorks in whatever way is best for you. Head on over to solidworks.com/first and click apply to request your license. We'll bring the area to tell you how to get started. You can use it on desktop. You can use your X design through CloudCab, or if you want to upload files to the cloud as well too, they have a solution for you. And once again, it's free for first teams. Use the software that is used at 80% of colleges and universities and over 350,000 businesses in the US alone. Head on over to solidworks.com/first and get started to see more about why teams are using SolidWorks and why it's so important for your team to consider. That's solidworks.com/first.
Another team that I thought had a pretty interesting drive base was the Delta Robotics for in 3 days. They decided not to go with that Mecanum drive base that we've seen as super popular, but instead had a very, very sturdy 6-wheel drive. And I think that's interesting in this game because with 2 robots on the field, you're going to have and only one like substation to pick the cones up from. There is going to be, I think, a lot of time in which like the other robot is going to have to drive around the field, maybe play some defense, mess with the other alliance, anything like that. And so having like a really strong and sturdy drivetrain like the 6-wheel drive could be a huge factor in how well their alliance performs, especially with the win-loss tie ranking system this year instead of just the ranking points. Other than that, very stable lift, pretty standard claw, definitely works well, has a really good grip on the cone. So overall, a good robot, maybe not really high in the wow factor rating, but definitely very reliable and high in the performance category.
For me, I personally ranked it pretty high in the wow factor because for something in less than 3 days, and in this case 30 hours, it's pretty good of a progress for a robot to be built, and that's definitely why I ranked it that high in that aspect.
For me, this robot is as much on the wow factor as it is a very practical robot to me. Like, it's just something that like I could easily replicate what this is, that sort of thing. So, I mean, overall, I thought I did okay. It's a little slow, right, for what it is, but overall, I think this is something the teams could take and replicate themselves if they wanted to.
Yeah. And speaking of the wow factor, I kind of want to talk about this next one, Kraken-Pinion 8680, their robot in 30 hours. I think their double reverse 4-bar specifically was definitely very impressive and a cool mechanism to me. I think within like the first 30-40 minutes of the game coming out, everybody was like, oh, you just do a double reverse 4-bar, it works so well in Skystone, this and that. And it's really impressive that Kraken-Pinion was able to implement it so quickly, and not only just implement it, but also show like the whole testing process and how they made it better and iterated on it only in 30 hours. So I think I really want to give them like big props to that, as I think that's going to be like something that teams struggle with this year, and just seeing how Kraken-Pinion dealt with it is definitely going to help them throughout the season, and I think that really improves their both wow factor and their practicality.
Yeah, definitely. For the performance, it could use a little work since it is still in the initial stages and there's a little wobbling as it reaches the top. But I know they said they're going to work on that. And it's definitely something to look at and refer to when other teams start making their robots.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with that. I mean, one thing you'll see, they added that big weight on the bottom to get their CG
Yeah.
where it need to be right. Scoring wise, low and on the ground, they did really well. Mid is actually kind of where they have some difficulties because their arm's not really articulated well for that. And then high, you'll see when they try to score a few times, they gotta, just like the Kettering team, it has to settle down a bit. Still a very cool robot by Kraken-Pinion, and looking forward to see what they build this year.
Yeah, I feel like it provides a really good base for teams to look at, see what works and what doesn't with the DR4B, and then go from there.
Yeah, very practical. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Now we have one of our international teams, team 11047 Screw It. They had, I think, the only turret in a robot in 30 hours or 3 days review, and they had a very, very interesting design. As far as WoW goes, I think they're one of the teams that are way up there. I mean, pulling off a turret in only 30 hours is definitely, or only in one day, is definitely very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm surprised by how effectively they were able to do it. So one thing I'm really interested in with this robot is seeing how they use their software to make sure that they can turn and move at the same time with that turret while avoiding all of those junctions, because you don't want to hit any of them and have them like wobble around. I know we did a test on first updates now, like how long it takes for the junctions to settle once you like tip them in one direction, and it definitely was a pretty significant time in the match duration.
Yeah, I definitely love how they did the turret, as you said. And like for overall robot, it looks like a robot that's been made probably 3 months in, and they do a really good job at finishing it up pretty fast, full robust robot. And I definitely give it a lot for practicality and performance.
Yeah, their build choice, or maybe what they're even required to use for things, may not be the most practical for other teams out there, and it definitely this is something that's easy to replicate right away. But performance wise, high marks for that, and as you mentioned, definitely cool to see a turret going. So definitely good points on the wall factor there.
Yeah. All right. This is probably my favorite robot out of all the robots that we're reviewing today. QUBE Team 14277 from Romania had an absolutely amazing design for their robot in 30 hours. I think it really proves the idea of just sitting in one place and having a super efficient design with like not moving at all. And I think with just a little bit of tuning and a little more practice, they could definitely get this down for the competition. As far as wow factor goes, it ranks pretty high for me, as I think it's very impressive how they were able to package everything without any like lifts or slides or anything like that, just articulating arms and still able to place it. And I think the way it works is that it actually spins, like the pivot is not like in the vertical direction in the same way that the arm rotates, but actually like around. So it's very, very interesting. And it's pretty cool to see how effectively they were able to pull it off.
Yeah, I definitely love how, like you said, how it can go just sit in place and go back and forth because that's what I felt was one of the main key strategies if you're playing from the loading area. And it's definitely going to be effective in scoring as once they get that fine tuning for when the arm goes fully backwards, it's going to work pretty well for performance.
Yeah, I feel really bad. We had a lot of recording issues trying to get this one. Sometimes when you have things overseas, it can be a little more difficult, but definitely a cool robot for sure on there. Yeah, I think there's just, as mentioned, just those one or two things that can be changed that really makes this into a top tier scoring robot. That we got on their CG a little bit better, that sort of thing. We would have seen them a few ranks higher even, but still a great performance by QUBE, and excited to see what they come up with.
Yep. All right, let's get on to one of our goBILDA robot in 3 days. This is going to be the Blue Alliance one. This featured a claw design with a two motor lift system, and I was pretty impressed with the claw itself. They made a linkage such that you can just keep rotating it, and the claw won't break, as in like it won't close too much and it won't open too much, such that it hits like the drivetrain or anything like that. So I think practicality-wise, that gives them huge points for that. As well as with the two-motor lift, I think that's another big factor in their practicality and performance score, as that means it's super reliable, but not like outrageous as we might see with some of the other designs. What do you guys think?
I feel for practicality, it might be a little difficult for new rookie teams to be able to understand how it works and fully create it themselves. But for like the robot performance is definitely something that's going to be robust. It works pretty well, and it definitely gets points for performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely good points in their documentation, right? goBILDA's done a great job with their
Hmm.
streams on there. Performance-wise, looks like it has potential, but we'll see. And, wow factor to me, I ranked it a little bit lower. It's linear slides with a claw. It's interesting. I didn't quite, the part that you mentioned in regards to how it articulates, I didn't quite notice that, so that might have changed my score if I would have saw that ahead of time.
Yeah, and I think especially with practicality being made completely out of goBILDA parts is something that's very accessible to
Yes.
all teams to like repeat and improve upon. So that will definitely be a huge help to teams that are like struggling or just getting off their feet or haven't designed an FTC robot before. It gives them like a really good way to just see how things can go together and what they can do with it. All right. Our next one is the Anchorage robot in 3 days. I was really impressed by like the cam mechanism they had. This was definitely the only robot to pick up the cones how it did, using like the hole in the center of the cones, and then having a cam mechanism in there. I am interested to see how stable of a grip or grasp it has on these cones, but I think it's something the judges would definitely be impressed with. Good, something really good to talk about in design or innovate. And overall, a very solid robot. Another thing I really, really liked was their centering mechanism for the cones. I think it's very advantageous for the cone stack against the wall, and maybe for the sub terminal as well, because they can always just run into the wall. But the thing is, if you have like stray cones around the field, it might be a little more difficult to pick up as you're like always pushing it away from you, and then when you stop, it might be a little further than you intended. But overall, a very good design.
Yeah, I like how they went for a unique approach to picking up the cones. But the main thing for that would be, I feel since they have to be able to reduce the arm and be able to insert it inside, that's going to take away a little bit from their cycle time and might affect performance by the very slightest.
Mhm.
This was probably my second favorite robot. To me, big kudos and wow factors. You mentioned Boss too. The centering mechanism I thought was great. We saw a lot of teams with just giant claws and that sort of thing. Having that wide thing is reminds me of what I see in FRC robots in many circumstances. So I really like this robot a lot, and really cool to see this team and their performance.
On to the next robot. This is the goBILDA robot in 3 days, the Red Alliance. This was a little bit different of a design with a virtual forebar and again like a roller intake like we've seen with Vex robots and other robots this year. One thing that kind of took away from the practicality for me with this robot was the four motor lift. I think it was one of those situations where it was more like, oh, we allowed 8 motors, so we should just use four of them on the lift. I don't know how much I agree with that. They did have a lot of heavy materials and objects on their lift, so that it did make sense to like use more power. But four is just a little too much for my comfort.
Yeah, I feel like this personally is my favorite robot because I love how the intake, when it's upright, it picks it up very fast. It could use some work on when the cone falls over, but if you replicate it into a way where you could use it with lighter parts and instead servos, then I think it could be a really nice performing robot right there.
One of the things with this robot, I think, over the blue one is they did I'm not even sure if it's coming up right here or not, but they did a test, and definitely you could see the difference in how quickly those linear slides got up. I mean, it wasn't like humongous, but enough where it's noticeable for the match. And agreeing with the rest of the mechanisms, I love the writing mechanism. It's cool to see how that intakes as well, too. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, a big thing with the practicality of this robot and how we thought about how teams can improve upon this design, using mechanisms instead of six-wheel drive on a design like this could be huge for some teams.
Yep.
All right, on to our Vulcan robot in 3 days. This is a team that always does, a robot very early season and releases it, and they always do an amazing job with it. I think this year is no exception. An incredibly fast sliding system, mechanism, claw, a pretty standard design, but very well implemented. I think we can see that they're super comfortable driving around the field already, and even though they don't have like the official game pieces and things like that, I think the general principle of the robot would apply very well to the power play game itself.
Yeah, it's a very simple mechanism, and the claw itself grabs the cone, and for this case, the cup, really fast. So I feel like once they have the full field, they should be able to be a really high performing robot right there.
Yeah, Vulcan had my favorite robot of the year overall. I just saw it from a scoring potential out there. It's just such a well-rounded robot. It's in many cases simple in what it has, but able to still get a great throughput and a great cycle time. Very impressed by Vulcan. Thanks to Stryker Careers for the continued support of First Updates Now. If you want to help create the medical technology tomorrow that will save lives, come check out careers.stryker.com. The Stryker Summer 2023 internship and co-op portal is now open. Head on over to Students and Graduates to view all paid internships that are available. Don't forget to join their talent network and stay in the know on what will be available. Make sure you check out careers.stryker.com.
So this is a very interesting robot. I specifically really liked their articulating arm. I think it was a unique design with having like the two jointed arm and the claw on the end of it. Another great example of how you can reach the high junction without using slides or a DR4B or anything like that. And it was very effective. I think their claw had a really good grip on the cones. And overall, it was just a robot that ranked really high in performance and practicality. And I think the wow factor just sort of came along with it because of how effective it was.
For practicality, I would rate it a little bit lower because I remember when rookie teams try to do double jointed arms, it's really hard for them to be able to control and master since like you would have to get the gear ratio right and you would have to program it correctly. But besides that, performance and design is definitely top notch for this robot.
Yeah, I GEarheads maybe ranked a couple ranks lower. It's nothing that takes away from what they've been able to design. I still think out of the 4 robots that we saw that I helped record, I think they had the most effective robot overall. And we can see, from a scoring potential, it looks really good. It is still a little bit slow, at least in this demonstration, to line up and score. So from a cycle time perspective, I think there's a couple of robots that do a bit better, but there's definitely some awesome improvements that we made that make this a well-performing robot at a competition.
Yeah. All right, on to our second robot, the robot in 30 hours. So this was a robot that combined a lot of the top mechanisms that we've seen so far with the linear slide, the claw, and the rotating arms. And I think that was what made it rank so high, especially in the performance and practicality area. It was able to score from both sides. Like it didn't really have a bias as to the front or the back because it was almost entirely symmetrical. And I think that's huge for aligning both to the cones when you're picking them up and aligning to the junction when you're scoring. It'll be really easy to align after you get that first cone on the junction. Overall, just very reliable and smooth in the whole thing. And I think it would rank really high in matches right now just because of how well they were able to drive it and control all of the mechanisms.
Yeah, it's definitely a great solution to like alternative to a turret, but practicality, it might be hard to design a mechanism like that, but at the same time, it's like at a medium difficulty, so teams could definitely figure it out and implement it into their robots.
I think we can all agree this definitely has the wow factor of the robots in 30 hours and takes the cake for that one. But I agree. Practicality might be a little more difficult for teams to implement. And from, showing off, I'd love to see them actually document their process of doing this. I think would be really great to show off to the community as well, too. To me, that's a lot about Robot in 30 Hours is actually trying to, show off what people did so people can learn from you as well.
Yeah, and this was, I think, the only robot that we've seen that was able to hold their beacon on the robot itself instead of picking it up later.
Yeah.
So that was definitely very important in the design. Okay, on to our number 1 robot for our robot in 30 hours rankings, and that's going to be Team 19068 ABSO-Tech from Romania. This is a team that did really well last year. They were the finalist alliance captain at MTI, and they definitely started this year off strong with a super quick claw design on a small chassis mechanism robot. I mean, this thing was just zipping around the field the whole match, and I think it really just shows the practicality of a very simple, reliable design like this one.
Yeah, I love the speed and definitely it gets a lot for performance as it is the number 1 ranked robot at the current moment. And I believe practicality also gets a lot of points. Wow factor, maybe not as much, but the performance and practicality is definitely top notch.
I'm going to disagree from a practicality standpoint. I guess to you guys, what makes this robot so practical that other teams could take it and learn and build from it?
I think the linear slides are something that are super accessible, especially with like the goBILDA Viper slides that are out now, and like the Andy Mark compact slide kit. Like there's just a ton of options to get a very quick and simple linear slide system up and running. And I think you can see like a lot of the components are like kit parts from goBILDA, Andy Mark Rev, things like that. So it should be something that's pretty easy to replicate, and then just improve upon, like maybe use a better claw design or use an intake instead of a claw. And things like that.
See, to me, that's maybe where the practicality falls, is where you said that you can see. I can't really see much of anything, right, for things. So, like, I guess by looking at it what things are, but getting the really nitty-gritty particulars, I think would be nice to see some really good close-ups of.
Yeah, as far as the documentation goes, I guess it's a little lacking. But I hopefully, this team would be open to answering questions and things like that.
Yeah, and you said, performance, I think we all agree this robot, absolutely phenomenal, performance on the field. It just looks so great from the cycle times. And to see it in real live like this in real time versus in many other videos where it's, time lapse or something like that, really does show just how awesome this robot truly is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the main part for me, like for practicality wise, I feel like it's mainly because it's just one motor for the linear slide and then 2 servos, one to lift the cone upwards and one to pick it up.
Yeah, it's something that's really simple and reliable, and will just last match after match after match. All right, I think that's going to wrap it up for our top robot in 30-hour power play teams this season. I think we're really excited to see how all these teams progress from these designs, if they decide to keep them or rebuild into something even better and more efficient. I think, it should just be a really great season for all of these teams and the rest competing. Reporting for First Updates Now, I'm Abbas, joined by Sahil and Tyler.
This video on First Updates Now is made possible by viewers like you and also the following sponsors. SOLIDWORKS is free for first teams. Over 80% of U.S. engineering schools and 370,000 plus companies use SOLIDWORKS to design great products. SOLIDWORKS can help you design a great robot on desktop or on the cloud. Go to solidworks.com/first to register your team. First alumni and mentors are making Stryker a top priority for their internships and careers. That's because Stryker knows that those in First are the leaders and innovators of tomorrow. If you want to help make the world a better place by creating life-saving medical devices and technology, get started at careers.stryker.com. Special thanks to Team 8680 Kraken-Pinion for hosting Robot in 30 Hours, and also to their sponsors.